everyone, welcome back to another video. So, in the intro montage of this episode, I'm sure you guys are able to tell, we are doing some work on the Mark IV, and more specifically, some exhaust work. Now, when I built the full exhaust for this car, I built this whole muffler module right here. And it does a phenomenal job at keeping this car quiet, keeping it civilized and sedate and everything like that. And that's great for most of the street driving that I have done with it. However, to have a setup as wild as the one that is on this car, which, if you guys are not familiar with it, if you take a little upskirt look, you can see kind of what we have going on here. This is a pretty wild Supra setup. The car's made a little bit over 1,200 wheel horsepower at, I think it was 38 pounds of boost. And it's an aluminum rod, 3-liter, 2JZ, 94 millimeter turbo. Pretty much every box that you can check with one of these cars has been checked with this thing. In terms of building a street strip car, kind of hedging more on the strip side of it. But with all that being said, although it is really cool to be able to have this car be extraordinarily quiet and civilized, well, there are some times that you just want to be loud and obnoxious. And that is what we are working on right now. So I dropped the muffler section out, obviously, and I began crafting this. And what this is the beginning of the straight pipe module. So when I build exhaust systems, I like to build them in a modular fashion. And what I mean by that is I will build a downpipe and a mid-pipe, and at the end of the mid-pipe it will terminate in a V-band, and then I will typically build different tailpipe options for cars like this. The SC300 is like that, the Mark II is like that, and I've built setups like this for a number of customers in the past as well. And it's what I think is a really cool feature to be able to swap out a muffler for a straight pipe, for so on and so forth. It's how I prefer to do it with my vehicles, and that's what we're going to do on the Mark IV, at least to start this video off. So I've began with a 4.5-inch V-band, section of 4.5-inch straight tube, and then a concentric cone that I've cut and shaped and everything like that. So it goes from 4.5-inch out to 5-inch, and it also has a bit of a miter cut into it to essentially act as a bend right here to give me a better angle for the next section of straight tube that'll make its way right to about the edge of the subframe right here. And that'll be, hopefully, the majority of the difficult work that needs to be done to get this exhaust to run the way that it needs to. I'm also tucking it as tightly to the bottom of the car as possible, and since the engine in this car is on plates as opposed to normal engine mounts, I won't have really any movement with any of this, so the exhaust will be hard mounted to a few different points in the rear of the car here, similarly to how the muffler module is, although the mounting bracketry is much more elaborate on this than it will be on the straight pipe, just due to the amount of weight and everything else that this thing has. So with all of that being said, the next order of business for this is to take this section of straight that I just prepped and everything else, and to put it on the end of the concentric cone here. I'll knock out the 2 welds on either side of the cone, one right here, and then the other one where this piece of tubing will meet up to this side of the cone. And that will get me, like I said, right about to the edge of the subframe right here, and then we can start building from there towards the rear and get our angle and everything correct for the actual tip section to stick out just how I would like it to from the rear bumper right there. know, it never ceases to amaze me each time that I strike an arc on some titanium, how much fun it is, how if you take the time to do your due diligence for good gas coverage and prep and everything else, how nicely it welds, how cleanly it comes out, and I'm always really happy to use my favorite Taikon Industries materials. But with that being said, the first section of this straight pipe module is completed. So we are pretty much to the end of the subframe like I talked about before. And at this point, if I take these pieces of straight that I've taped together, we have one bend right there, or one segment of a bend that needs to be cut, and then this can all fit in place and pretty much has fallen into place better and more easily than I could have imagined. So I guess what I need to do at this point is take either a segment of a bend or one of these fresh 5-inch elbows right here, hold it up here, and mark out roughly where this needs to be cut at. I can cut the segment out of the bend, and then we'll be, I think, 3 welds minus the hanger, but 3 welds away from the straight pipe section being completed. And everything will fit, everything will be good to go, and most importantly, we'll be able to hear what this thing sounds like, all loud and wild out the back of the car. Just like that, the straight pipe module for the Mark IV, at least the tube section of it, is all completed. So it came out very nicely, and it fits exactly as I wanted it to in the bumper cutout. You can see I have a little bit of an air gap between the bumper skin and the tube, as well as, you guys probably won't be able to see it, but the tube to the subframe. Everything has the right amount of clearance, at least what I was looking for, and therefore it will have the right amount of ground clearance. So now that the tube is all completed, we need to mount it. And I have somewhere in here, right here, this leftover tab from, I don't remember if this was Don's car or something else. And then I also have this piece of titanium strip stock. And with those two pieces, I'll be able to make the mounts that I need to or the mounts that I want to rather, for this exhaust. So I'm going to mount it in the rear, and I'm going to mount it up towards the chassis, up somewhere in that area as well. Since this is a pretty light piece, I'm not going to go overboard with the mounts that I'm putting on it, but I think having two that way will be perfectly sufficient and perfectly adequate to A, hold the exhaust in place, and B, keep everything solid the way it needs to be. With the two mounting tabs and an install under my belt now, the Mark IV is now straight piped, and it looks absolutely killer. So it has a ton of ground clearance, as you guys can see right there, and this is nice and solid, and I'm really happy with the way that it just came out. The only thing that I may change is if you look at the tip, how far it protrudes past the bumper. I think it looks a little bit goofy. So I may take and scribe a line on this and cut it back a little bit, but I can do that at a later date, as this straight pipe is really easy to get on and off of the car. So let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room. This project was done pretty much specifically to alter the sound of the car and to make it raw and uncorked and aggressive and everything else. So let's go ahead and see what this thing sounds like now. And I have a feeling it's going to sound absolutely wild. that sounds absolutely insane. I could not be happier with it, and it's crazy the difference that you'll see between even the exhaust options for this car. So I have the fender exit option that's up there on the shelf. That is race mode. So when it's going on the dyno, or when it has gone on the dyno in the past, or when it's going to the track or something along those lines, I put the fender exit on it. And as you can imagine, with the exhaust going from, I don't know, 10 or 15 feet, something like that, from turbo to tailpipe, to maybe 2.5 or 3 feet, all things considered, with the fender exit, it's going to be loud and crazy and shoot fire and everything else. But it always blows my mind when you take that exhaust and the sound waves and everything else that are exiting the turbine outlet, and rather than having it run just through a body panel, you just run a tube out to the back of the car, and the sound and the difference in the sound that you're able to achieve that way is just remarkable to me. It blows my mind every time, and I'm happy now, even though I preach about having cars be nice and civilized and enjoyable and everything else. Well, let's focus on the enjoyable portion. And there are points in time when enjoyable constitutes being loud and obnoxious and having the car sound crazy and all of that. And I'm very happy now to have multiple, I guess 3 exhaust options for this car. We have the race fender exit, we have the muffler section, and now we have a straight pipe section for it. And I can switch back and forth between all of those at my discretion. I have full liberty and autonomy to do so, and now I have the options for it. So, although we are finished with this project at this point in time, we still have more work to do on this car. And we'll get into that tomorrow for me and in a few seconds for you guys. But we have some under hood work to do. And a big piece of what you guys see here right now is going to go away. And we are going to build something new, something exciting, and something with a few different features that I do not have on the part that is under the hood right now. And we'll get to that very soon. So, let's address the elephant in the room. What part are we removing from this thing, or parts rather, and what's the plan moving forward? Well, let's talk about what we're removing first. And that is the intake manifold. So, this intake manifold, it certainly works. The car has made power on it and everything else, but it has a few features involved with it that I'm not incredibly happy with, and things that I want to address and make this whole setup better moving forward. So let me go ahead and pull the manifold off, and once I have it on the cart, I can discuss what my thought process is, my rationale and all of that, and discuss what the plan is moving forward. After a little bit of a fight, the Mark IV's old intake manifold is removed. So let's go over why I'm changing this up. So at first glance, the manifold looks okay, and for all intents and purposes, it is. But with this car's intended use, and the fact that I will need to have injectors cleaned and things like that from time to time, what I have here just is simply not going to work. So this old manifold, you can see that it has single injector ports on the top side, and then on its bottom side, I put the secondary injector rail. And again, if this car was anything other than what it is, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But being that, like I said, I more than likely will end up having to pull this rail at different points in time to have the injectors cleaned and all of that, this is not the best way to do it. As to get this secondary rail off of the intake manifold, it necessitates pulling the intake manifold off of the car, and that is not the most fun task in the world. In addition to the secondary injector rail, the placement of these two injector bosses right here makes it very difficult to get a tool in here to actually loosen the nuts and to get the manifold to come off. I have a custom 10mm 12-point wrench that I use to do so, and even with the custom wrench, getting my hands and everything in there to get the manifold off is a bit cumbersome, and if I would ever have to do so at the track, it would not be impossible, but it would be very low on the list of fun things to do. I also have the factory idle air control valve on the bottom of the manifold that we don't use, so that is another place, or that is a place for a potential leak. And the final thing, I guess, is this throttle body. The throttle body works, but I want to swap it out for a Ross Machine Racing 90mm throttle body and one of their flanges and so on and so forth. So the throttle body will be for sale. I think I'm going to keep the manifold around just if I ever need it for another project. It's a good, perfectly functional intake manifold. There isn't really any reason for me to get rid of it. Injectors and all of that I'm going to keep. The IAC I'll keep as well because they're kind of expensive and difficult to come by. And one other thing that I think I might change on the new manifold is this plenum is built out of 4.5-inch aluminum tubing. And I think I may size it down to 4-inch tubing, as one of the last times I was at Accelerated, they had a Hypertune plenum there, and at least for the floor plate of the plenum, which is this lower section right here where all of the runners attached to, I measured the width of it and it came out right around 4 inches. So yes, you may end up losing a little bit of airflow at the top end, but you can also make up for that in terms of response. And depending on how I craft the new manifold, kind of the overall thickness of the plenum volume may end up being able to stay the same. So I have some figuring and some thinking to do about that, but I do have the base of the new intake manifold right over on the toolbox. So let's go take a look at it. this idea started running through my head, I did some research to try to find an intake manifold head flange. And if you guys have ever looked up intake manifold head flanges for anything, they aren't exactly the easiest thing to come by. Exhaust manifold head flanges, not the end of the world. You can find them pretty easily for most popular applications, but for whatever reason, intake manifold flanges are not the easiest thing to come by. Now, I remembered that my buddy Doyen over at Autosports Engineering had offered 2JZ intake manifold head flanges, at least at one point in time. Now, I checked his website, he didn't have them listed any longer, but I reached out to him, and he happily machined one for me, as well as a new rail, and without me running my mouth, those things are sitting on the top of the toolbox right behind you. So here is what he sent out to me. You can see the rail is machined for twin injector ports on the top side. The intake manifold head flange itself is machined in a corresponding manner. You can see on the top of each of the ports it has twin injector ports. So no more fuel rail on the bottom of the intake manifold. It'll be one rail for all 12 injectors, and that will make things easier to service, obviously. And I'll also have the opportunity to clean up some of this rat's nest under here that really needs some attention and really needs some cleaning up and refinement. But I could not be happier with these parts that I got from him. And I'll have to weld a number 10 bung onto the feed side and get a number 8 bung and weld it onto the return side. That is no big deal. But if you guys need any billet pieces or accessories or anything like that for your 2JZs or for any other of the applications that he serves, please check out Autosports Engineering. You can see that QR code there. And there's also their Instagram handle. They make really, really nice stuff, and I'm very excited to have this flange right here be the base of the new intake manifold for this thing. So, although I can't make really any crazy progress on the intake manifold build for this car right now, what I can do is to go and get a block of aluminum and make a new head flange fixture plate for this intake manifold. I have an old steel one, but I think I can make a little bit nicer one out of aluminum. So I'm going to run down to my local metal supply shop, metal supply house, get that piece, and then we can go ahead and do some machining here on my trusty drill press and everything else, and get this so it can fasten down onto that chunk of aluminum, and we'll be ready to start building whenever I order the other materials and get everything in to knock this out. a bit of machining, and I put very heavy quotation marks around that, the fixture plate for any 2JZ GE intake manifold, I guess, is completed. So this plate is 6 inches wide, 24 inches long, and 1.5 inches thick. And I opted for this as opposed to the old steel fixture plate that I have for the sake of aluminum being a better heat sink than steel, and that should help with any warping or help minimize and mitigate the warping that will inevitably happen as I weld this new intake manifold together. So I used my transfer punches and transferred the fastener pattern over to this after roughly centering the flange onto the plate. I then drilled via a 2-part drill process, 1 pilot hole and then drilling out to the final diameter. I came in and I tapped all of the holes M8 125, so all of these fasteners will hold it down and keep everything nice and tight. And I also used my marking punch set to label it 2JZ GE intake, so that way I don't forget when this fixture inevitably goes up on the shelf for a bit after this intake manifold build. So one other thing that I had to do that I'm not super stoked about, but it just needed to be done. If you look at this corner here, I had to shave a little bit off of it, as the fill pot on this thing, the flange that I had made for it right in here, of course had just the smallest amount of interference that would not allow the new head flange to fasten or to actually sink up to the head fully. So thankfully this is on the bottom side of the flange, and I did my best to clean it up and make it look nice still. So you really won't be able to see that, and by the time that the intake manifold is powder coated and all of this is said and done, it'll be invisible. But all of that being said, what I need to do now, and before I can make any additional progress on this, I need to get a materials list together. I need to get the materials ordered, and otherwise I will just be sitting here with a flange bolted to a plate of aluminum, and that does nobody really any good. So let's go up to the office, pull up the old project materials spreadsheet, get everything marked down there so I can figure out what the budget is for this manifold, and we will be able to move forward from there. Well, the materials list for the Mark IV's new intake manifold is completed. I've sent the emails that I needed to. I have things in motion for all of the materials. And the last thing that I did, as you guys just saw in that really short little clip, is I pulled the old feed and return lines off of it. So since I'll be going to a single fuel rail, I don't need these Y blocks and divided lines and everything like that that the old feed and return consisted of. That will cut out, I mean, we have 4, 5, 6 lines and Y blocks and everything else that are now pulled out of the car, and that's less space that is taken up by more things in this rat's nest. And I'm going to try to clean this up a little bit, maybe reroute some lines, so on and so forth, as I am in the process of doing this new intake manifold build, just to keep underneath of the manifold a little bit more consolidated, a little bit less of a nightmare, and make it a little bit easier for myself to get my hands in there if and whenever I need to pull the manifold and service anything. But with all that being said, and with me essentially at a stopping point right now on this thing, I think that's a good place to wrap up this video. So thank you guys, as always, for coming along on all of these different journeys and all of these different adventures with me. It feels good to get back to work on this thing again and to have another big welding and fabrication project on it. It's been a while since we built any parts for this, the straight pipe at the beginning of this video notwithstanding, obviously. But this intake manifold has been something that has been in the back of my mind for a long time as something that needs to be addressed, and now is a better time than ever to do that. So we have that to look forward to. I really can't wait to get started on this build and to put that new fixture plate and the new flange into service. It's going to be something really, really cool. Beyond that, we will have some additional stuff to do on the SC. I have a couple of tune things that I want to play around with on this, and we'll see if we can make it sound kind of wild at idle. And if it works on the SC, then I can probably employ the same tactic onto the Mark IV as well, and especially with this new straight pipe, it'll sound absolutely incredible. And I certainly have not forgotten about the Aristo project, but to get started on it, we first need to finish up the Mark IV, as once I begin on the Aristo, I really want to be able to dedicate all of my attention and all of my efforts onto that car for the duration of that project. So we have a lot of cool things to look forward to, and with warm weather getting the Mark II out as well. But all of those things are things to look forward to in the future. And like I said, right now we need to get the Mark IV up and running again and ready for race season. But before I run my mouth anymore, that'll be the end of this one. So as always, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Check out the website for manifolds, for merch, for all things good that way, including my MCB collection. The link for the MCB collection can be found in the description below, and I have a variety of different apparel options, all in a really cool multicam black colorway that I think is really neat, and I hope that you guys like it as well. And if you don't like it, well, hopefully I offer something in the future that does speak to you and that you would like to add to your collection. But with all of that being said, that will be the end of this episode, and I will see you guys in the next one.